Well, since I'm pretty sure if you review a Star Wars movie on YouTube in your thumbnail, you have to have a picture of you holding a lightsaber, so let's just get that out of the way right now. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Brockopp side. Star Wars The Force Awakens was directed by J.J. Abrams, and this picks up 30 years after the events of the original trilogy. So after the Empire fell, the First Order rose up in its place. Luke Skywalker has unfortunately vanished, which is actually one of the biggest mysteries of the movie leading up to it. It's like, where has Luke Skywalker been all this time? Well, then the opening crawl just gives that away immediately. He vanished. So that answers that question. And if you guys are new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button if you live talking by movies. So yeah, let's get back into the review for Force Awakens. So yeah, when this came out back in 2015, anticipation was completely through the roof, because not only was it the first Star Wars movie in over a decade since Revenge of the Sith, but it was also a continuation of the original trilogy that most people generally liked more than the prequel trilogy, and I was definitely right in the middle of the hype machine with this one. My friends and I were just so enveloped in Star Wars fandom, it was ridiculous. You know, wearing lots of cool graphic tees and rewatching the trailers over and over again, and I actually ended up seeing this movie in the theater a total of 5 times, which is unheard of for someone like me, because usually if I want to rewatch a movie in the theater, I'll usually stop at the second time, maybe a third. So getting to see this movie 5 times is definitely a big deal for me. And yeah, it was just one of those movies that was just a really fun movie theater experience. But anyway, so let's get into the review itself. So right off the bat, this movie feels like a natural progression of the original trilogy. It's got a great mixture of real sets, practical effects, and of course there's CGI in there as well, but it looks and feels like the original trilogy. It was even shot on 35mm film, so you know that grain and imperfection you get from shooting on film, which wonderfully completes that original trilogy aesthetic that this movie has. And honestly, this movie has actually quite a bit more CG than you may initially think. Now, of course, there's going to be a lot of CGI in this movie. It's only a giant space movie with creatures and ships and explosions and things like that. But honestly, for a very long time, I thought they brought the ships to life the old-fashioned way with miniatures and blue screen. And hell, there are some shots from the Millennium Falcon flying in space that look like they came right out of the original trilogy, which then I found out that was completely CG, which kind of blew me away a little bit because it looks so believable and lifelike, like they used old-fashioned techniques to bring these ships to life, which I honestly think is a really good attention to detail on their part. And we also get to see brand new uses of the Force that we didn't get to see in the original or the prequel trilogy, like stopping blasts midair or freezing people with the Force. That stuff was really cool, and it felt like a natural progression of the Force abilities we've seen in previous movies. So like I mentioned earlier, the First Order has risen up from the ashes of the Empire, and Luke Skywalker has vanished. Now they're slowly taking over the galaxy, so they're kind of like the Empire, but not really. We'll get back to that later, but we get some new stormtroopers, which are really sleek and cool looking, and I personally like these stormtroopers a lot more than the ones in the original trilogy, and not to mention, these stormtroopers actually hit things, so they're not completely blind when they're firing at the good guys. So we're introduced to Adam Driver as Kylo Ren, who is a great new addition to the Star Wars villain library, and when he takes off his helmet for the very first time later in the movie, I remember a lot of people were like, wait, what? Because he's not horribly disfigured like Vader was, he's just a normal looking guy with some sexy black hair, which I basically understood that was the point from the very beginning, because this is just a kid of Han Solo and Leia, sorry, spoilers, you know, who was trained to become a Jedi by Luke Skywalker, but then he got turned to the dark side by Supreme Leader Snoke, so really he's not like an Anakin Darth Vader level threat, he's kinda just this confused kid who got sucked into a death cult, and that much is very prevalent when he says lines like, no, you're wrong, Supreme Leader is wise. He's a very damaged character, and I like that we get to see those moments where he lifts up the veil and he kind of just breaks down once or twice, which I really like how we get to know so much about this guy within the very first movie of this new trilogy, as opposed to Darth Vader, where at first he was just kind of this big bad guy in a black cape, but then we slowly learn more and more about him and what he went through the original trilogy, and then we got the prequels to find out like what caused cause him to turn to Darth Vader, so getting to see this much about this new villain was great in my opinion. And then we've got Daisy Ridley as Rey, who is another great addition to the new cast. You know, she's tough, independent, a complete badass, but she still is charismatic and has an actual personality, which I really like because there are times where she's, you know, completely in serious mode, just, you know, hitting people with sticks and be like, I don't need you to hold my hand, sir. But then she can turn around and have really nice heart-to-heart moments with characters like Finn and Leia, and those are really, really great. Now, a lot of people have accused Rey of being overpowered, which I strongly disagree with. You know, throughout the movie, she discovers she's highly sensitive to the Force, so kind of all these abilities and all these, like, you know, visions and stuff she's receiving now are kind of coming all at once, so she hasn't found a way to contain it and control it just yet. So I think that's a lot of it because, you know, the movie is titled The Force Awakens after all, so it's awakened inside of her, so now she has to learn to take the reins of the Force a bit and use it to her advantage. You know, in that lightsaber fight with Kylo Ren at the end of the movie on Starkiller Base, you know, she might not have won that lightsaber fight if it wasn't for the fact that the planet was literally collapsing between them. And then we've got John Boyega as Finn, who his character is really cool because he starts out as a First Order stormtrooper that realizes how truly awful the First Order is, defects from that, and ends up joining the Resistance. And I think that is really cool to see a character that is pulled from the ranks of these mindless minions, give him an actual character, and realize he's on the wrong side of things. So that is just a really cool thing to see. And on top of that, Finn's also just a really charming and funny character that you enjoy seeing him in every scene, especially with the brand new characters, which also includes Poe Dameron, played by Oscar Isaac, who is essentially kind of the new Han Solo of this, you know, new group of characters. You know, his chemistry with Finn in this movie is one of the best parts of the movie as a whole, and these two characters become really fast friends, which is really cool, and it makes you really want to see more of these two characters together, you know, trying to save the galaxy, which we still need a little bit more of that. And of course, one of the big selling points of this movie was Harrison Ford coming back as Han Solo. And Harrison Ford seemed to slip right back into the character with ease, you know, just quickly adopting that sense of humor and the suave attitude, but a character that we are seeing 30 years after the events of the original trilogy, so we see what has happened in that time, you know, of course, with his own son being turned to the dark side like that, so we get to see how that's affected him personally. And it's also no secret that Harrison Ford wanted Han Solo to die at the end of Return of the Jedi because he felt like his character was the one that should make the worthy sacrifice, which of course that did not happen in Return of the Jedi, so spoilers. So in this movie, Harrison finally gets his wish, and in the scene where Han Solo gets killed by Kylo Ren is one of the most heart-wrenching moments in the entire movie, and I just love the execution of this scene. You know, you got Kylo Ren and Han Solo down here on this bridge, you got Rey and Finn and Chewie up here looking down, the lights slowly come out of the room, every little sound the characters make is echoed throughout the room, the music is absent, and it slowly builds up to that moment where Kylo Ren sticks the lightsaber through Han Solo, and it is just one of those moments that gets me every time I rewatch this movie. It's a great scene, but every time I see Chewbacca shoot Kylo Ren in the stomach, I always shout, "Damn it, Chewie, aim for the head next time!" Carrie Fisher also returns as Princess Leia, now General Leia to the Resistance, and even though I do think she is good here, I think as far as the original trinity of characters, I think that she's the least strong of them. Not saying it's a bad performance or anything, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Carrie Fisher doesn't have a whole lot to do in this first movie, and on top of that, she's kind of been out of the acting game for a very long time, as opposed to Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford, who have had plenty of acting gigs in between trilogies, even if Mark Hamill's basically just been voicing the Joker this whole time, but you know. But all these characters in this movie have such great chemistry together and such emotional power, which is something you want in your leads in a Star Wars movie, so this movie exceeds tremendously at doing that. So John Williams' score for this movie is one that honestly took me a little bit to truly appreciate, because at first I was like, okay, you know, it doesn't really have anything super special to it, but then after listening to it a few times on its own and then in the movie itself, I realized it's actually a great soundtrack, especially with Rey's theme and Kylo Ren's theme. Those two things mixed with some classic medleys and cues from the original trilogy. It's a great score. It took me a while to understand it, but it's great. And the movie itself is really fast-paced, pushing the story forward with every single scene, which is not a bad thing as long as your script is actually written to be paced like that. So it's not like a lot of movies I've seen lately where it just feels like everything is being rushed to get to the ending. And it all builds up to Luke Skywalker finally being found and setting up the next two movies in the trilogy, which some people I know complain that Luke Skywalker is only there for like a minute or two at the end of the movie and it just felt like it didn't need to be there, which again I do disagree with, because the whole point of the movie is our main characters going to find Luke Skywalker so he can help defeat the First Order, so this movie accomplishes what it was setting out to do, plus that moment where Rey and Luke Skywalker meet, the past and present generation of heroes with that lightsaber extended out while the music just builds and leads into the end credits. I mean, that is a moment right there. That is a moment. So probably at this point in the review you can tell that I freaking love The Force Awakens, but, it's also not without its flaws. So going back to the First Order, you really have no honest clue what the hell the First Order is supposed to be, because, they're kind of just like Empire 2.0, with Star Destroyers and TIE Fighters and Stormtroopers and a, angry guy with a black suit and a red lightsaber controlling things, but they're really actually not the Empire because they don't control the entire galaxy, so really they're more like a space terrorist group of sorts trying to just take over as much land as possible. So basically, if you want to make it a military thing, they're just kind of like space Nazis. It would just be nice to get some confirmation that they actually are space Nazis, just so that way we know what the hell they're supposed to be, but yeah. Space Nazis. Captain Phasma is a super cool looking character with the silver armor and the cape, but she really doesn't do anything at all except get thrown in a trash compactor. So that's a bummer. Probably the biggest complaint that most people have about this movie is that the story is basically more or less a remake of A New Hope, right down to, there's documents inside a drawer that need to be given to one of the main characters, to the intro of Kylo Ren, to the fact that the heroes have to go and blow up this new Death Star in the form of Starkiller Base, which I definitely do not disagree with those comparisons at all. The only one that does really annoy me though is the Starkiller Base thing, because I feel like that was not necessary to bring in a brand new Death Star basically, and I feel like if they took the whole Starkiller Base thing out of the movie and put something else in there, I feel like people would have probably been a lot more forgiving as far as similarities to other movies go. But the big reason I don't mind the fact that it's basically like a new version of A New Hope is because this movie is a next generation story, exactly like A New Hope was a new generation story. And also, there's this whole thing about people not really loving how the prequels were going direction-wise and story-wise and stuff. So I feel like Disney and Lucasfilm were like, okay, we need to play it a little safer with this movie, reel them back in with some things that they love from the previous trilogy, give us a story that's very familiar, but it's a very Star Wars-y plot. So I feel like this was kind of like a nice warm hug to be like, here, come here, shh, it's okay, Star Wars is back, it's okay. And if that doesn't do it for you, just remember this one quote from George Lucas: it's like poetry, it rhymes. So all in all, Star Wars The Force Awakens is a great continuation of the original trilogy, gives us some brand new characters to root for, gives us a lot of things we love from the original trilogy, might be a little repetitive, but it set up a bright future for the Star Wars movie franchise that people all over the world are totally happy with as of the year 2019. Rogue One review coming next week, yay! So, those are my thoughts on Star Wars The Force Awakens, and again, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button if you live talking by movies. But anyway, so, if you guys have seen The Force Awakens, then type it down below, and we'll see you on the Brockopp side. Not to be confused with the dark side.